Welcome to IPA Talk. It is the first week in February 2019. I'm Brian Schwartz, and I'm here with IPA's Government and Public Relations Director, Alison Maley. And Alison, it's been a busy session so far.
Yeah, already. I mean, just a full weekend with both the House and the Senate chambers in action, so lots to talk about.
How many bills have been introduced at this point in the session?
Easily over 4,000 bills.
And not all of those certainly will pass, but a number of them do apply to schools, correct?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what is interesting about our profession and tracking all that legislation is that not only does it affect principals in terms of curriculum and things like that, but also taxes and revenue and minimum wage that we're going to talk about in just a moment.
Great. And in terms of the process, the bills are for the most part in committee at this point?
Right.
And then they'll proceed to the full House chamber, and then if they pass, they will switch chambers and they'll try it again.
That's right.
Okay.
How a bill becomes law.
How a bill becomes a law. Terrific. So one of the things that has garnered a lot of attention is the minimum wage bill, which has actually passed its chamber of origin, correct?
Right. It passed the Senate yesterday, actually. So this past Thursday, this week. So it would raise the minimum wage in Illinois to $15 an hour by 2025. It's an additional $1 for next year, so going up to $9.25 an hour. So yeah, it's already passed the Senate, so it will make its way over to the House very shortly, I think.
Okay, and you said it's a 5-year ramp up in terms of when that $15 is implemented.
Right.
And I believe there is a positive tax implication for businesses too.
Right.
Correct?
I believe it's tax credits or tax incentives of some sort that businesses are able to take advantage of to help kind of offset those costs.
Terrific. What would you say is the prognosis for that bill as it goes into the House?
It sounds good. I mean, in terms of passage, I think folks have been having lots of conversations on both chambers, and I think the Speaker has indicated that there's a willingness to consider the bill as is, or maybe with some minor changes perhaps, but I think it seems ready to go.
Sure. And with the Democrats now in the House and the Senate having control and a Democrat governor who has stated this is one of his priorities, certainly that is on what we call the fast track. Correct?
Exactly. And I think there's been a thought that the governor wants to have that done and ready to sign before his State of the State address in a few weeks or a couple weeks.
Okay. Another bill that has gotten a lot of attention both last session and this session is the minimum salary for teachers.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the bill had passed last year. It was vetoed ultimately. So it sets up a minimum salary increase. It's around $32,000 and change in the first year of implementation. It goes up a couple $1,000s a year until ultimately it gets to $40,000 a year for a teacher's salary. The way the bill is written now, though, that is in perpetuity. It doesn't stop at 40. It goes up by whatever the consumer price index is. So it could fluctuate year to year, but it is something that would increase year to year, assuming that the CPI would follow suit. So it would be based on that previous year's salary.
Okay. So I know there's been a lot of concern in especially some districts about increasing it by CPI, increasing the minimum salary by CPI. Do you anticipate that will remain in the bill?
Not sure yet. I think the sponsor, Senator Menard, has indicated that he is open to some changes and open to some suggestions and amendments. So I think that's something that, members are really sensitive to. There's been talk of adding some sort of a kind of a regionalization factor, similar to what we have in EBM, for determining salaries throughout the state for school districts. So those are things that I've heard talked about. I haven't seen any language just yet, but we will see.
Okay. And even without the CPI provision, that would just be a floor. Schools wouldn't, by law, have to maintain that salary. It's just a minimum.
That's right.
Okay. Another bill that carried in over from last session deals with an unfortunate series of situations in Chicago. Can you talk about the CPS abuse legislation?
Right. So the Chicago Tribune did a sort of an expose over the summer related to sexual abuse, sexual assault of students by educators, unfortunately, again. So obviously, as a part of that, there's been a lot of legislators that want to take action and do something. So there's been several bills filed. I think we're going to have a link to an article that kind of tells you more about it. But there's several pieces of legislation related to mandated reporters and the timeliness of reporting, being able to suspend licenses and revoke teaching licenses or educator licenses, and even there's legislation to revoke a pension of someone that's somehow involved in this type of criminal activity. So we will be monitoring all of those. We look forward to working with sponsors to try to figure out the best ways to kind of manage this situation and be able to make sure that kids stay safe at school.
Sure, absolutely our number one priority. I know that we're also concerned just making sure that there are adequate due process protections for anybody against whom an accusation has been made.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Those are probably the three hottest topics this first week in February, and certainly each of those will change as it goes through the formal legislative process. But how can members stay in touch with what's going on with the legislature?
Each week I put out the Advocacy and Action newsletter. We include the Alliance Legislative Reports, which is a rundown of all of the bills that were heard in committees or taken action on the floor each week, as well as things to come for the week ahead. So what's happening in committees, which bills are going to be heard. So stay tuned to that information. And if you have any questions ever, please feel free to give us a call.
A long way to go yet.
Yes.
And the budget still yet to come.
Right.
So make sure you stay in touch with that. And Alison, just lastly, can you tell us how they can participate in the legislative process?
Sure. So
to do so.
our legislative committee is open to any member of the IPA. So we're always looking for new members and folks to reach out to their legislators in their districts. Of course, we have our phone to action advocacy tool as well, where you can communicate with your legislators, send messages, make phone calls, and do those sorts of outreach activities. But always invite your legislators to come to school too.
Well, thank you, Alison. That's a lot going on this time of year. It's also time to begin negotiating your contract for the 2019-20 school year. And to help you with that, IPA has just put out our 2019 Salary Fringe Benefit and Career Planning Study, which will be in your mailbox the second or third week in February. For the IPA, I'm Brian Schwartz.
I'm Alison Maley.
For more information, click on the link now on your screen.